The Liaoning is not China's best aircraft carrier. That distinction belongs to the Shandong and, more recently, the Fujian. The Liaoning is China's first aircraft carrier, a rebuilt Soviet-era Kuznetsov-class hull that the plan acquired from Ukraine in 1998 as a nominally decommissioned vessel intended for use as a casino, a cover story that deceived nobody and was never particularly intended to. After 12 years of fitting out at Dalian shipyard, the Liaoning was commissioned into the People's Liberation Army Navy in 2012. Its ski-jump bow limits the J-15 Shenyang Flying Shark to a reduced weapons and fuel load compared to a catapult launch. Its radar suite is capable but not the equal of the Nimitz-class systems it operates near. Its crew has been building carrier aviation proficiency for 14 years, accumulating the institutional knowledge that carrier operations require in a way that cannot be accelerated by budget or political will. What the Liaoning has that matters in the specific geometry of the South China Sea is presence. An aircraft carrier does not need to be the best aircraft carrier in the theater to change the geometry of the theater by existing in it. At 9:12 a.m. USS Theodore Roosevelt was operating 290 nautical miles east of the Spratlys Islands, conducting standard carrier operations in international waters. The P-8A from Patrol Squadron 4 had launched from the Roosevelt at 7:45 a.m. on a maritime surveillance track that took it 120 nautical miles west of the carrier, within 80 nautical miles of Fiery Cross Reef at 22,000 feet. Standard mission profile. The P-8A had been conducting this same profile from this same carrier on a rotating schedule for the past 19 days. The Liaoning had been operating 340 nautical miles northwest of the Roosevelt for the past 4 days. Its presence was known. Chinese carrier operations in the South China Sea were tracked continuously by multiple sensor systems, and it had been operating a standard carrier air-wing exercise profile that had not intersected with the Roosevelt's operations area in any tactically significant way. 4 days of parallel operations, each carrier group maintaining its own airspace, the proximity noted and managed through the maritime incident prevention protocols that both navies operated under. At 9:12 a.m., the Sentry's picture changed. The contact appeared at bearing 312 from the P-8A's current position, range 67 nautical miles, altitude 1,100 feet, not climbing from an island runway, not approaching from a mainland direction, rising from the sea surface, appearing on the Sentry's radar picture as the contact climbed above the radar horizon from a position consistent with a carrier deck launch, approximately 95 nautical miles northwest of the Sentry's current geometry. The Liaoning's position at 9:12 a.m., 98 nautical miles northwest of the Sentry's radar horizon for low-altitude contacts. An aircraft launched from the Liaoning would be below the Sentry's reliable detection geometry until it climbed above approximately 1,000 feet at this range, exactly where this contact had appeared. The contact climbed through 3,000 feet, then 6,000, then 10,000. Speed, 420 knots and increasing. Type characterization, radar cross-section consistent with J-15 class, confirmed at 9:13 a.m. by the Type 1474. Zhuk-M radar emission signature, a Russian-derived AESA system that the Shenyang J-15 carries. Its pulse characteristics cataloged in the same database as the Su-27 variants it was derived from. The heading, 134 degrees. The bearing to the P-8A's current position from the contact's location, 133 degrees. 1 degree of offset. The J-15 was not heading toward the P-8A's current position. It was heading toward the P-8A's position in approximately 8 minutes at current closure rate. The J-15 pilot had a predictive intercept solution, not a GPS waypoint toward the P-8A's last known position, a calculated intercept point that accounted for the P-8A's speed, heading, and the closing geometry of the J-15's own approach. The predictive intercept solution required knowing the P-8A's track in advance, either through the Liaoning's own long-range surveillance picture or through intelligence about the P-8A's standard operating profile from the past 19 days. 19 days of the same flight profile. The predictive solution was not sophisticated. It was patient. The scramble order reached the F-35C section at 9:13 a.m. The F-35C section had been on cap station at 38,000 feet, 80 nautical miles east of the P-8A's position. The standard cap geometry had been established to protect the P-8A from approaches from the west and northwest, the island chain directions, the mainland directions. Not from the northwest at low altitude, below the radar horizon, from a carrier that had been operating in a non-threatening profile for 4 days. At 9:13 a.m. and 28 seconds, the catapult fired. The geometry the lead was working with as the F-35C cleared the Roosevelt's deck. J-15 at bearing 312 from P-8A, range 61 nautical miles from P-8A, altitude 14,000 feet, and climbing, speed 490 knots. The F-35C at 290 nautical miles east of the Spratlys, bearing 127 from the J-15's current position. Range from the F-35C to the J-15, 82 nautical miles. Range from the F-35C to the P-8A, 76 nautical miles. The intercept geometry was not simple. The J-15 was closing on the P-8A from the northwest at 490 knots. The F-35C was closing on the J-15 from the southeast at Mach 1.08 and increasing. The P-8A's distance from the J-15 was closing faster than the F-35C's distance from the J-15. The J-15 would reach close intercept range on the P-8A in approximately 7.5 minutes. The F-35C would reach intercept geometry on the J-15 in approximately 6 minutes at its current closure rate. 6 minutes versus 7.5. 1 minute and 30 seconds of margin. In the South China Sea at 9:13 a.m., 1 minute and 30 seconds was the frame that contained the entire engagement. The AN/APG-81 in passive mode was building the Zhuk-M emission portrait as the F-35C climbed through 18,000 feet. The Zhuk-M was active in air search mode. The J-15 pilot had activated his primary radar from the moment of launch, probably to maintain situational awareness of the crowded airspace he was entering, possibly to begin building a fire control picture of the P-8A. The emission was clear, powerful, and directional, pointing northwest to southeast, covering the sector where the P-8A was operating. At 9:15 a.m., the first piece of information that changed the tactical assessment arrived on the EW Suite's passive display. The Zhuk-M's mode changed from air search to single target track. Not on the F-35C, on the P-8A. The J-15 pilot had acquired the P-8A on his radar and had transitioned to fire control mode. 9 crew members, a non-maneuvering aircraft, a J-15 at 38 nautical miles in fire control track. The ROE hierarchy was clear and was the same as it had been in every previous P-8A intercept in this theater. Fire control radar track on a non-combatant U.S. Navy aircraft constituted weapons employment preparation under the applicable framework. Deterrent action was authorized. The APG-81 activated at full tactical power at 9:15 a.m. and 14 seconds. Not LPI, full power, the decision made by the specific combination of the P-8A9 crew and the 7-minute window. The fire control solution on the J-15 built in 2.1 seconds to 79% confidence. Green. Range to J-15, 52 nautical miles. AIM-120D solution valid. The Zhuk-M's RWR received the APG-81 full power emission in 0.3 seconds.
What the J-15 pilot received was a fire control lock from a bearing his own radar showed as the southeast, the bearing of the Theodore Roosevelt's operating area, the direction a responding F-35C would approach from. The APG-81's AESA characteristics were in the Chinese threat library. The J-15 pilot's symbology identified the lock as a U.S. fifth-generation fire control radar, not ambiguously, not after a long characterization delay. In 0.3 seconds, the library entry was current.
The F-35C had been expected.
The J-15's response was not the immediate heading reversal that previous engagements with older generation pilots had produced. The J-15 pilot maintained his heading for 6 seconds, 6 seconds during which the fire control track on the P-8A continued, and the closure rate with the P-8A continued, before executing a maneuver that was the first specifically tactical response in the engagement rather than a reflexive one. The J-15 descended from 24,000 feet toward 8,000 feet, nose pitching down at 2,800 feet per minute, speed increasing through 520 knots. The descent changed the J-15's aspect relative to the APG-81's tracking geometry. Side aspect at 52 nautical miles during the descent, which increased the J-15's radar cross-section from the frontal aspect value and simultaneously took the J-15 toward lower altitude where the South China Sea's surface clutter would degrade the APG-81's track quality. At 8,000 feet over the South China Sea, the surface return was substantial enough to reduce the F-35C's fire control solution confidence by approximately 22% for targets at low altitude.
The descent was the J-15 pilot using the same terrain exploitation logic that had been used in the Typhoon engagement and the Shamal engagement, using the environment as cover. In this case, not weather, but the radar-cluttered boundary between sea surface and atmosphere that every shipboard and airborne radar in the sector had to contend with at low altitude.
The first friction event at 9:15 a.m. and 44 seconds confirmed that the J-15 pilot's tactic had partial effect. The APG-81 fire control solution. Confidence on the J-15 dropped from 79% to 61% as the J-15 passed through 14,000 feet in its descent. 61% was below the employment threshold. Not by a large margin, the 75% threshold was 14 percentage points above 61%, and the confidence was fluctuating between 57 and 64% as the J-15's altitude decreased toward the clutter boundary. The Zhuk-M STT on the P-8A had been broken when the J-15 entered its descent maneuver. The P-8A's crew was no longer in single-target track. The J-15 had prioritized the defensive maneuver over the offensive geometry. That was operationally correct under the circumstances, but it meant the P-8A's immediate danger had reduced. The fire control track was gone. The reduced but immediate danger had been replaced by a less immediate but continuing concern. The J-15 was at 9,600 feet, heading 134 degrees still, speed 530 knots. Still closing. Still heading toward the P-8A's approximate position, now using the Zhuk-M in a search mode rather than a track mode, looking for the P-8A in the surface clutter environment where the J-15's own radar had an advantage against a large non-maneuvering target, because the Zhuk-M's sea clutter rejection algorithms had been optimized for maritime search operations by a force that anticipated operating primarily over the South China Sea. The lead descended to 16,000 feet and adjusted bearing to address the J-15's new low-altitude position. The APG-81's confidence rebuilt to 68% at 9:16 a.m. as the descent adjusted the tracking geometry. Still below threshold, the second friction event arrived at 9:16 a.m. and 15 seconds. A second J-15 contact appeared on the Sentry's picture. Not from the Liaoning's current position, from a bearing consistent with a long-range low-altitude transit that had been below the Sentry's radar horizon until this moment. The second J-15 was at 4,200 feet, bearing 308 from the P-8A, range 94 nautical miles, speed 460 knots, heading 128, two J-15 Spratlys. The second one had launched earlier. Its current position at 94 nautical miles range placed its launch time approximately 22 minutes before 9:16 a.m., which was 8:54 a.m., 29 minutes before the first contact appeared on the Sentry's display. The second J-15 had transited at low altitude, below the radar horizon, navigating toward the P-8A's predicted position on a timeline that would produce a two-aircraft intercept from two different bearings with approximately 7 minutes of separation. The Liaoning's planning cell had launched two aircraft, 18 minutes apart, on converging low-altitude approaches designed to arrive at the P-8A's position from different bearings after the first aircraft had drawn the defending F-35C section into the engagement geometry. The second J-15 was the real intercept. The first J-15 was the geometry setter. At 9:16 a.m. and 22 seconds, the lead transmitted to the wingman. 2. Lead. Second contact bearing 308, range 94 from P-8A, low altitude. This was the setup. Take contact 2, it's the primary approach. I'll maintain deterrent on contact 1. The wingman was at 42,000 feet and had not yet descended into the engagement geometry. From 42,000 feet with the second J-15 at 94 nautical miles from the P-8A, and 4,200 feet altitude, the wingman had approximately 12 minutes before contact 2 reached the P-8A's position. 12 minutes was sufficient for the wingman to close to fire control geometry. At 9:17 a.m., the lead's APG-81 confidence on contact 1 recovered to 76% as contact 1's descent stabilized at 8,800 feet. Green. The solution was valid. The lead transmitted on guard. Plan aircraft bearing 312 from the Spratlys approach corridor. You have placed a fire control radar track on a U.S. Navy non-combatant aircraft. You are being tracked by U.S. Navy aircraft in fire control mode from two bearings. Reverse course immediately. Two bearings. The guard transmission communicated what the tactical picture showed. Both J-15s were now aware that their approach had been identified, that the defending force knew about the two-contact architecture, and that the geometry they had built over 22 minutes of patient low-altitude transiting was not providing the surprise it had been designed to produce. The first J-15's response came in 11 seconds. Not a heading change. The Zhuk-M activated in single-target track mode again, this time not on the P-8A. On the lead's APG-81 emission bearing, the J-15 pilot was building a fire control solution on the F-35C, the Zhuk-M STT on the lead. A fire control track, 47 nautical miles range. Whether the Zhuk-M's tracking algorithm could resolve the F-35C's reduced radar cross-section at 47 nautical miles in the current atmospheric geometry, the South China Sea haze, the surface clutter at 8,800 feet altitude for the J-15, the frontal aspect the F-35C was presenting, was the technical question that the RWR tone's character was communicating. A sustained STT warble rather than the intermittent search pattern that indicated a tracking algorithm in acquisition rather than lock. The Zhuk-M had a fire control track. Marginal confidence but a track. At 9:17 a.m. and 44 seconds, the lead maneuvered. A 4G descending turn that changed aspect angle and took the F-35C below a humidity layer at 22,000 feet that was producing a mild ducting effect on radar propagation. The turn cost 8% of the fire control solution confidence on contact 1, but broke the Zhuk-M's STT within 3 seconds of the maneuver's initiation. At 9:18 a.m., contact 1 turned northwest. A hard left bank, 5G, nose pulling toward bearing 310. Not back toward the Liaoning directly, northwest, then west, in a turn that was burning energy while putting distance between the J-15 and the APG-81's tracking geometry. The Zhuk-M returned to wide search mode. The pilot was breaking off the first contact's approach. Contact 2 was at 79 nautical miles from the P-8A and closing. The wingman had Contact 2 in APG-81 LPI fire control mode, confidence 64% and building. The geometry was narrowing on schedule. At 9:19 a.m. and 10 seconds, the wingman's fire control solution on Contact 2 reached 75%. Green. The wingman transmitted on guard simultaneously with the solution reaching threshold. Plan aircraft bearing 308 from Spratlys corridor. You are in a fire control tracking solution at 62 nautical miles. Reverse course immediately. Contact 2's response, immediate. A right bank, 30 degrees, nose pulling to bearing 048 northeast, back toward the Liaoning's position. The Zhuk-M on Contact 2 went to standby within 2 seconds of the bank initiation. Speed reducing from 460 knots as the energy of the transit was consumed in the turn. The second J-15 was aggressing. At 9:20 a.m., both J-15 contacts were heading northwest and northeast respectively, range from P-8A increasing. The wingman held fire control track on Contact 2 through 72 nautical miles before releasing to LPI monitoring mode. The lead rebuilt the fire control solution on Contact 1 through 61 nautical miles before Contact 1's range exceeded 80 nautical miles and the solution faded below the employment threshold.
Both J-15S were going home.
The P-8A had maintained its track throughout the engagement, its crew receiving the tactical picture from the Sentry's Link 16 feed, the aircraft commander's transmissions to the Sentry throughout the 8-minute engagement precise and professional. 9 crew members who had been in single target track range of a J-15's fire control radar for 19 seconds. At 9:21 a.m. the lead transmitted. Sentry, Falcon lead. Both Dragon contacts egressing. Contact 1 bearing 310, range 82, northwest. Contact 2 bearing 048, range 71, northeast. P-8A clear. No ordnance employed. Fuel state bingo +21. Request updated Liaoning position and tasking. Updated Liaoning position. The intelligence requirement had become the operational question. The Liaoning had launched 2 aircraft on a coordinated low-altitude intercept profile. Understanding the Liaoning's current position and the geometry of any additional launches was the tactical picture the section needed for the remainder of their station time. The Sentry's response included the Liaoning's position, 102 nautical miles northwest of the P-8A's current position, heading 165 southeast, slowly closing the distance. Not aggressively. At 18 knots, the Liaoning was not conducting an aggressive approach. It was maintaining operational positioning, the carrier's natural drift toward the area its aircraft had been operating in.
The debrief ran 2 hours and 56 minutes.
The first finding was the architecture. The 2 contact launch profile, 1 aircraft as the geometry setter, 1 as the primary approach, had been executed with a precision that indicated pre-mission rehearsal and a launch timing calculation that accounted for the first contact's role in drawing the defending section's attention, while the second contact completed its low-altitude approach from a different bearing. The planning quality was assessed as significantly above what the intelligence community had previously attributed to plan carrier aviation at the Liaoning's crew experience level. The second finding was the radar horizon exploitation. Both J-15S had transited at altitudes specifically calculated to remain below the Sentry's reliable detection geometry from the Liaoning's operating position. The second J-15 had maintained this profile for 22 minutes, a navigation discipline that required precise altitude control and a clear understanding of the radar horizon geometry from the Liaoning's position relative to the Sentry's orbit. This level of tactical sensor awareness had not been previously confirmed for planned carrier aviation operations. The third finding was Contact 1's Zhuk-M STT on the Lead F-35C. The fire control track had been achieved at 47 nautical miles in the South China Sea's attenuating haze against the F-35C's frontal radar cross-section. The track had been marginal. The characterization of the RWR tone suggested a solution confidence below the Zhuk-M's standard employment threshold, but it had been a track. The Zhuk-M had resolved the F-35C at 47 nautical miles in a maritime surface clutter environment. That performance updated the previous assessment of the Zhuk-M's detection capability against fifth-generation platforms in this specific atmospheric geometry. The fourth finding was the operational significance of the Liaoning's geometry. A carrier operating 100 nautical miles from a standard patrol track could launch aircraft on low-altitude approaches that remained below the defending force's radar detection geometry until they were within 60 nautical miles of the target. The current CAP geometry, designed to address approaches from the island chain directions, had not accounted for a carrier-launched low-altitude approach from the northwest. The CAP station positioning needed adjustment when a planned carrier was within 150 nautical miles of the patrol track. That adjustment had not been in any previous mission brief for this rotation. 2 J-15s from Liaoning, 1 P-8A with 9 crew, 1 F-35C section. 8 minutes from first contact to both J-15s egressing. 22 minutes of undetected low-altitude transit by Contact 2. 1 Zhuk-M fire control track on the lead at 47 nautical miles. 19 seconds of STT on the P-8A. Ordnance employed. 0. CAP geometry update required. Confirmed. Plan carrier aviation tactical proficiency. Reassessed upward. The South China Sea at 9:30 a.m. was clear and hot. The Liaoning was at 105 nautical miles northwest of the P-8A's track, still heading southeast at 18 knots. Its flight deck had 2 J-15s in the recovery pattern. The Roosevelt's flight deck had an F-35C section returning to the break. 2 carriers, 395 nautical miles apart, both generating the operational record that the other's intelligence staff would spend the following days analyzing. The next patrol flight was scheduled for 7:45 a.m. the following morning.